Mia glanced at Noah, and then followed his gaze and saw Jacob. She spotted Megan by his side in her elegant blue dress, and frowned in jealousy, irritated that Jacob had moved on so quickly from their broken relationship.
Don't you know what kind of event this is, Jacob? You're far too poor to afford any of these stones. Are you trying to win some money by gambling?
Looking around at the wealthy people there, Jacob suddenly felt out of place. However, he decided to ignore her barbed comments. Since it was Cole's event, he didn't want to embarrass his friend by making a scene. But Mia continued in a loud voice.
It's only been a few days since we broke up, and you're already messing around trying to impress another woman.
Noah saw an opportunity to further embarrass Jacob.
Since he's so poor, he likes to pretend that he's rich. Don't let him fool you,
he said, directing his comment at Megan. They both remembered being kicked out of King's, but they were still under the impression that Jacob had stolen the company card. Megan looked at Jacob with questioning eyes. She didn't understand why the woman in front of her, who was dressed so luxuriously, was angry with Jacob. Jacob smiled bitterly and whispered,
"She's my ex-girlfriend. She thought I was poor, so she dumped me last week."
Megan realized that Mia was a gold digger, and she smiled at the thought that Mia didn't know how Jacob's circumstances had improved. She took Jacob's hand and said,
I don't mind if he is poor or not. I'm looking for a man to be with, not his money. It's better than finding some rich playboy who's a jerk.
Noah looked at Jacob and Megan with undisguised hostility. Then, he noticed how attractive Megan was, and felt a pang of jealousy that the woman with Jacob was prettier than Mia. Noah took out a business card with a smile and said,
"Hello, my name is Noah Sanford. We should get to know each other."
The business card was made of pure gold. In his desire to show off, Noah always took a few of those cards with him when he went on dates, hoping that it would help him make a good impression. Mia was irritated by Noah's sudden interest in Megan, but she felt powerless to do anything about it. Jacob had always been much better behaved than Noah, and Mia glared resentfully at Megan and felt a sudden urge to grab her hair and wrestle her to the floor. Megan ignored Noah's offer of his card. Instead, she turned to Jacob and said,
Let's go over there and take a look at some more stones.
Jacob smiled at her and walked by her side. Noah was left holding his card in midair. He wasn't used to women ignoring his advances or refusing to take his golden cards. Although the event was filled with rich people, very few would be pretentious enough to hand out golden cards, and Noah felt several pairs of mocking eyes on him. Feeling humiliated once more, he quickly put the card away. On the other side of the room, where many of the rocks were displayed, there was a group of people standing in front of a huge stone. Several jewelry dealers and gamblers were pointing and discussing the potential of the stone. The raw stone seemed promising. It held the right hues and was very large, so the consensus was that it was worth a lot of money. It was priced at $1.2 million, and there was much discussion about what it might contain. One of the members of staff standing near the stone announced,
"This stone is now up for auction. The highest bidder will take it home. Let the bidding commence."
One of the onlookers said,
I'll bid 1.3 million.
1.4 million.
The bids for the large stone rose quickly, with several people bidding furiously. Jacob looked carefully at the stone. The energy it exuded was too little to interest him, and he decided it wasn't worth anything like what people were bidding.
I'll bet there's an emerald in that stone.
Megan said excitedly, squeezing Jacob's hand. But Jacob shook his head and smiled.
I doubt it.
When the price of the stone reached $4 million, fewer people were bidding. Only Julian and Wyatt still seemed interested. Julian's family was in the jewelry business. If the stone within was good quality, it could be resold at a very high price, so Julian was determined to purchase it. But Wyatt was also determined to get the stone, and every time Julian raised his bid, Wyatt increased his. The price quickly rose to $7 million. Julian took out his mobile phone and made a call to his father to ask for permission to continue the bidding war. He was about to continue when Jacob walked over to him and took him by the arm. Julian looked at him quizzically, and Jacob shook his head, indicating that he shouldn't go any higher. Momentarily stunned, Julian understood what Jacob meant, and concluded that he must know something about the stone that indicated it wasn't worth that much. Julian recalled the recent incident with the vase when two well-known appraisers had made a bad call. Jacob had made a lot of money from following his instincts. He thought,
maybe Jacob's right. Maybe it isn't worth so much.
Wyatt glanced at Julian and sneered.
What's the matter, Julian? Can't you afford it?
Julian looked at Wyatt with disdain.
Yeah, you're right. I can't afford it. Good luck to you. I hope it's good quality.
Of course, it's good quality. Why do you think so many people were bidding for it? I'll tell you what, I might donate a few broken chunks to you so that you don't leave here empty-handed.
Julian was furious at Wyatt's boasting.
I wouldn't be so arrogant if I were you. You might regret it later.
Wyatt shrugged dismissively and paid for the stone using his card. The member of staff looked at Wyatt respectfully.
Sir, would you like to cut the stone here?
Yes, of course. Let's see what we have.
He was confident that it would at least contain jade and that revealing its quality would silence Julian and fill him with jealousy. The member of staff nodded and then spoke into his radio, summoning the stone-cutting team. A short while later, a forklift with a stone-cutting machine was driven over to the large stone. Two large men jumped down from the forklift and began setting up the machine. By the time it was all prepared, a crowd of people had gathered, eager to see what secrets the stone would reveal. One of the burly men looked at Wyatt and held out a piece of chalk.
Would you like to mark where you want us to cut?
Wyatt took the chalk and drew a line on the stone.
Cut it here. I'll reward you for your efforts afterward.
He was sure that the stone would be filled with valuable jade, and he looked around with an arrogant expression. The two large men continued to set up the machine, aiming the blade at the point that Wyatt had marked. When the machine was finally ready, one of the men looked to Wyatt for confirmation. Wyatt nodded dramatically. Moments later, a loud whirring noise erupted, and white dust escaped into the air as the machine cut into the rock. The crowd looked on excitedly, and Wyatt found himself suddenly feeling nervous. The stone had cost him a lot of money, and it would be a considerable loss if it turned out not to be valuable. The blade went deeper into the stone, and then suddenly, the stone split in two. As the dust cleared and revealed only two gray and white surfaces, Wyatt's face dropped. Several people from the crowd stifled laughter.
Continue cutting.
Wyatt ordered, his voice sounding panicky.
There has to be something of value in there.
The two men did as they were told and continued cutting from different angles, cutting the stone into smaller pieces. But each time the stone was cut, the result remained the same. Gradually, the crowd lost interest and dispersed, commenting on how things had turned out for Wyatt. Staring at the gray stone, Wyatt felt sick with anger.
Sir, do you want us to continue cutting?
Wyatt sighed helplessly. At that point, he knew there was no jade inside, and that it had been a complete waste of money. But he was just as upset about what his purchase had done to his reputation. Looking at some of the people walking away, he could see them shaking their heads and smiling wryly. Julian caught Wyatt's eye and decided to take the opportunity to make him look even worse.
If you're feeling generous, Wyatt, perhaps you could donate the stone as building materials for housing the poor. I'd say that's about all it's good for.
Julian's comment sparked laughter from several people. Wyatt glared at him and turned to leave without replying. But Julian wasn't finished.
Hey, what about the stonecutters? Didn't you say you were going to give them a generous tip? They've worked hard for you, and it's not their fault that you bought a worthless rock.
Not wanting to be embarrassed any further, Wyatt took $1,000 in cash out of his wallet and threw it on the ground. Cole walked into the room just in time to see what had happened. He looked at Wyatt and said with a playful smile,
Don't let losing so much money spoil your day. There are still many good quality stones left. Why don't you stay and see if your luck improves?
Without waiting for an answer, Cole walked over to Jacob and greeted him with a smile.
Jacob, I must thank you. From now on, I consider you a brother.
Cole, are you all right?
Julian asked, his voice full of concern. Julian knew that Cole liked Jacob. He assumed he was voicing his appreciation of the fact that Jacob had made the auction he sponsored so exciting. He thought,
Or maybe Cole banged his head in the car crash. That might explain his effusive behavior.
Jacob smiled back at Cole.
I'm not sure what this is all about.
Cole nodded thoughtfully.
No doubt you don't want to reveal all of your secrets. We'll say no more about it for now. Let's enjoy this event, and I'll reward you when I get the chance.
Using the senses his ancestors had bestowed, Jacob could tell that Cole had just narrowly escaped death. He guessed that Cole had deduced that the crystal that Jacob had given him had saved his life. He patted Cole on the shoulder in friendship, and then continued perusing the remaining stones with Megan. As they walked around, Jacob suddenly sensed a dazzling green aura in front of him. He was shocked and stopped to examine it carefully. The light seemed to come from an unimpressive raw stone that was slightly larger than a basketball. The surface of the rock was ordinary, but the green aura was strong.
How much is this stone?
Jacob asked the member of staff at the side. The woman glanced at the rock and said,
It's $110 per pound.
Julian walked over at that moment and, following Jacob's gaze, looked at the rock.
There are no patterns or interesting colors. There's very little chance that it contains any jade. How about I help you pick something more promising?
It's all right. Let's not judge a book by its cover. Remember what happened to Wyatt?
Wyatt heard his name and stormed over to where they were standing.
I think I'll buy it just for fun. How much does it weigh?
It's 194 pounds.
I like that number. I'm feeling very optimistic about this rock.
As Jacob paid with his card, he heard a mocking voice from behind him.
That's got to be at least $20,000. Are you sure you can afford it?
Jacob sighed as he readied himself for another unpleasant interaction. Jacob turned around and saw Noah and Mia walking over together. It was Noah who had asked the question.
He's right. Don't think that you can act rich just because you're around people with real money. I doubt you could afford it, even if you maxed out every card you have.
Jacob was in no mood to listen to anyone condescend to him.
Shut the hell up.
He snapped. His glare was so icy that the two of them felt as though they were frozen to the spot. He had made up his mind to ignore them when he heard Wyatt chime in as well.
This guy thinks that a piece of broken stone is some kind of treasure. I suppose it would appear so to an ignorant rube,
he said with a mocking grin. Jacob returned the smile.
At least I'm not ignorant enough to buy a worthless boulder for $7 million. My hometown has a ton of big rocks. You could have just gone there and picked one up for free.
People within earshot began to laugh, and Wyatt felt his face grow hot with anger and embarrassment. Everyone in the room had watched him throw away an obscene sum of money on a dud that was nothing more than a common rock. Wyatt hoped that Jacob would have the same experience and see how he liked it. After his credit card transaction had cleared, Jacob wanted to cut the stone he had purchased right there as well. The stone was loaded onto a cart, and a burly employee pushed it over to the side of the hall. Several jewelers began to murmur excitedly when they saw that another stone was about to be cut, but their conversation turned pessimistic when they got a closer look at it. A man with stone-cutting tools made his way over to the cart.
How do you want me to break it, sir?
He asked Jacob.
Just cut away a small section of the outside.
Jacob replied after a moment of consideration. The stone cutter nodded. Although he didn't see the need to take such a delicate approach for a stone that most likely had nothing inside, he had to abide by the purchaser's requests. The high-pitched whine of an electric saw filled the area, and as it began to shave away the outside of the stone, a brilliant green color began to reveal itself.
Look, there's something green inside.
It looks like it's full of emeralds. What a jackpot. I wonder how many pendants I could make out of that.
The jewelers who had scoffed at Jacob's ordinary-looking purchase just moments before began to crowd around the area where the stone was being cut. In truth, Jacob had no idea what kind of stone it was. He knew that it must have been special when he had the vision of the green light radiating from it, and he had trusted his instinct to buy it. Having seen enough to convince them of the stone's worth, the jewelers who had gathered around Jacob were no longer content to simply observe the proceedings. They began to shout their bids over the roar of the saw as if they were on the floor of the stock market. The crowd on the sidelines seemed to be even more anxious than Jacob. They looked like wolves with a green light shining in their eyes. However, the stonecutters saw word on, heedless of the cries of the spectators. The man who wielded the saw was also excited by the sight of such a high-quality gem, and he worked carefully to reveal the beautiful material underneath. Once he had finally finished cutting, he wiped the stone dust away with a wet cloth, and everyone gasped at the final result. A huge, brilliant green emerald gleamed on the cart like a dragon's egg, and a hush fell over the crowd. Finally, a middle-aged man broke the silence. With a hint of timidity in his voice, he said,
$5 million. It's a very fair price. I hope you'll consider it.
$5 million sounded like an unbelievable sum, but Jacob truly had no idea what the market rate was. He looked at Julian, who had followed him over to the stone cutting area, and whose eyes were as wide as saucers.
Jacob, don't sell that emerald to anybody else. I'm going to buy it from you.
Jacob was surprised. but he would rather sell his amazing find to a friend than someone he had never met before.
It's yours.
He said amiably. Julian looked as if his birthday and Christmas had come all at once.
You won't regret it.
He grabbed Jacob's hand, overjoyed.
I'll give you a fair price. How does 50 million sound to you?
If the crowd had been quiet before, it went completely silent upon hearing Julian's offer. There was no way that any of them could make any kind of profit if they had to bear that kind of cost up front in the purchase. Julian, however, was a renowned jeweler with shops all across the country, and he could hire the best artisans to create emerald pieces for him. He could also put the cut stone in his flagship store as a display of his expertise and connections, or he could auction it himself. He was almost guaranteed to make money on his purchase. Jacob nodded.
That sounds good to me, but I'd like a few pieces of the jewelry you make out of it to give as gifts. You can just deduct the cost of those from your fee.
What are you talking about?
Julian said as he put an arm around Jacob's shoulder. He was so happy that he almost seemed drunk.
You can have them for free when they're done.
By that time, just about everyone had made their way over to see the grand new discovery. Megan stared at him in shock, and across from him, Wyatt and Noah glared in his direction with such ferocity that he thought he might burst into flames. They looked like they had been slapped in the face. Mia had kept to the background, and she regarded Jacob with a trace of regret. He had been the nicest boyfriend she had ever had, and he had just become $50 million richer. She had treated him so poorly since their breakup that she knew there was no chance for her to win him back. Once they had finalized their deal, Jacob and Julian went together to select a few more stones from those on offer in the hall. Most of them were pieces of raw jade of varying quality and color. Julian chose a few pieces, but compared to the emerald, none of them was truly extraordinary. Just as Jacob and Julian were about to leave the exposition, someone screamed in the crowd. An older man had dropped to the floor, and Jacob could see that his face was pale and sweaty.
Mr. Zeller, what's wrong?
A younger woman, presumably his assistant, yelled, and she rushed to his side.
Zeller? Is that the Andrew Zeller who owns Nightdale property? What happened to him?
An onlooker asked, craning his neck to see. Andrew Zeller was one of the largest real estate tycoons in Oakdale City.
I don't know. It looks like he had a heart attack.
Cole saw what was happening and took out his phone to call an ambulance as he rushed over. Jacob was about to step forward to treat Andrew when another young man beat him to the punch and went to check the fallen man's pulse.
He's had a heart attack. Does he have any medicine?
The young man turned to the assistant and demanded somewhat arrogantly.
We went out in a hurry this morning and he forgot to bring it.
The assistant said, hanging her head. The young man nodded, and then took out a needle box very similar to the one that Jacob had.
That must be Ryan Tao.
Julian said to Jacob as he saw Ryan take out his needles.
He's from a long line of traditional medicine practitioners. His grandfather, David Tao, is famous.
I've heard of David Tao, but is Ryan really that skilled at such a young age?
His medical skills were handed down from his grandfather, so he's been studying since he was a child.
David Tao was indeed a renowned figure in the community for his reputation as a provider of traditional medicine, but Jacob doubted that he and Ryan had the same level of knowledge as his own grandfather. Not to mention himself.